My name is Evelyn, and I'll never forget the Christmas dinner when my own mother looked me straight in the eye, smirked, and said, "Nobody likes you. Get out." For a moment, the words didn't even register. I thought I had misheard, that maybe the clink of glasses or the scrape of silverware had twisted the sentence. But then I saw the smirks, the suppressed laughter, and finally, the chuckles that spilled across the table. Everyone laughed, except me. I sat frozen, my fork hovering over my plate, my chest tightening like it was being squeezed in a vice. Christmas was supposed to be about warmth, family, love. But in that moment, it felt like the very people meant to be my safe haven had turned into a firing squad. My brother Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning like this was a show. My father didn't say a word, didn't even look my way, just kept eating his ham as if my humiliation was background noise. It wasn't just the words that crushed me. It was the silence that followed from the people who should have defended me. My mother's voice was cruel, but the other's silence was complicit. And I realized in that instant that this wasn't some slip of the tongue. It was the truth they had all been circling around for years, finally laid bare in one ugly sentence. I wanted to scream, to demand how they could laugh at me, how they could enjoy my pain like it was entertainment. But my throat closed up. My voice didn't come. All I could do was stare at my plate, at the food I suddenly couldn't eat, and swallow the bitterness rising in my chest. Inside, I felt something splinter. This wasn't just about one cruel comment. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being the afterthought, the one who was never quite enough, the one always overshadowed by Daniel's golden boy glow. Every forgotten birthday, every brushed aside accomplishment, every moment they looked through me instead of at me, it all condensed into this one sentence: "Nobody likes you." I thought maybe, if I just stayed seated, kept still, the moment would pass. Maybe someone would speak up. Maybe someone would turn and say, "That's not fair. She belongs here as much as anyone." But the only sounds were the scrape of knives, the muffled laughter, and the faint hiss of the fireplace in the background. So I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound sharp enough to cut through their amusement. I didn't say a word. My silence was heavier than anything I could have shouted. I walked out of the dining room, past the glittering tree and the wrapped gifts, past the door where wreaths hung like mocking symbols of cheer. Out in the cold night air, snow falling against my cheeks, I realized something. What hurt most wasn't the insult itself. It was the confirmation of what I had always feared, that in their eyes I didn't belong. And as much as it shattered me, a small flicker of resolve ignited beneath the pain. If they didn't want me at their table, maybe it was time I built my own. From the outside, my family looked like the picture of perfection. Every year, we posed for glittering Christmas cards, the kind with matching sweaters and carefully staged smiles. Neighbors gushed about how beautiful our photos were, how lucky we must be to have such a close-knit family. They saw us walking into church in coordinated outfits, presenting ourselves as polished and warm, the type of family everyone else wished they could be. I used to believe the illusion myself. As a child, I thought, maybe if I smiled hard enough in those pictures, I could make it real. I thought if I tried to fit into the mold they presented to the world, maybe I'd feel the warmth that radiated from those glossy holiday images. But behind the doors of our house, the truth was colder than the snow outside. The sweaters were itchy and uncomfortable, the smiles forced. We weren't a family bonded by love. We were actors performing roles in a production designed to fool outsiders. The star was always my brother Daniel, the golden child whose grin lit up the center of every card, every family portrait. My parents made sure he was front and center, the pride of our name. I was tucked to the side, cropped by angles, present but never important. The favoritism wasn't subtle. At the dinner table, conversations revolved around Daniel's grades, Daniel's promotions, Daniel's achievements. My own stories, about art competitions, about late-night studying, about small victories I was proud of, were brushed aside. If I spoke too long, someone would interrupt. If I tried to insert myself into the spotlight, the conversation quickly swerved back to where it belonged. To them, Daniel was the sun. I was the shadow. Neighbors praised my parents for raising such accomplished children. Teachers whispered about how wonderful it must be to grow up in a household so supportive. They didn't see the cracks, the barbed comments my mother aimed at me, the smirks when I stumbled, the dismissals when I tried to stand tall. They didn't hear my father's silence when I looked to him for defense. They didn't see the way my brother, encouraged by their indulgence, learned to laugh at me as though it were his right. And I never told anyone. I learned early that no one wanted to hear the ugly truth beneath the polished surface. If I complained, my mother called me dramatic. If I cried, Daniel called me weak. If I looked sad in photos, my father warned me to smile properly because appearances mattered. So I smiled, I stayed quiet, and I carried the weight of invisibility. That was the illusion. A family everyone admired, but one that left me feeling small, excluded, and constantly on the edge of being erased. What they showed the world was not who we were. It was who they wanted people to believe they were. And as long as Daniel shone, they didn't care that I was fading into the background. The perfect family? Number, just a perfect performance, and I was the one cast in the role of the outsider. Daniel was always the star. From the time we were children, every room seemed to tilt in his direction. If he walked in, conversations bent toward him, laughter rose louder, and all eyes followed. At family gatherings, my parents glowed when he spoke, as if every word that left his mouth was something precious. I used to sit across the table, waiting for my turn to share something about myself, but it rarely came. My brother's career was a constant source of pride for my parents. They bragged about his job to neighbors, about his promotions to relatives, about his brilliance to anyone who would listen. I still remember one Thanksgiving when I nervously told the table about a project I had just completed at work. It meant something to me. I had stayed late for weeks, sacrificed sleep, poured myself into it. Before I could even finish explaining, my mother cut in with, "Daniel just closed a huge deal last week." Isn't that amazing? The conversation swerved, the table erupted with admiration, and my words were left to wilt in silence. It wasn't just his job. His charm was something they worshipped. Daniel had a way of flattering, of smiling at just the right time, of making people feel like they were the most important in the room. My parents called it charisma, said it would take him far. They never seemed to notice that his charm often came at someone else's expense, usually mine. If he teased me, they called it brotherly fun. If he embarrassed me, they laughed along. I don't think they ever realized how often my silence was the price of his jokes. And then there was his relationship. When Daniel brought his girlfriend home, my parents practically rolled out a red carpet. They praised her beauty, her intelligence, her family background. Every time she came over, my mother would beam as though Daniel had delivered some crown jewel into the family. Meanwhile, when I dated someone, the reaction was tepid at best. Polite smiles, no questions, no real interest. Once, after I introduced someone I cared about, my father actually asked me later if it was serious enough to bother remembering his name. Every gathering revolved around Daniel. Birthdays became stages for his stories. Holidays became showcases for his successes. Even Christmas mornings, which were supposed to be about family togetherness, became platforms for my parents to gush about what Daniel had achieved that year. My gifts were opened quietly. His were celebrated like ceremonies. I can't say I didn't try to earn their attention. For years, I worked hard, pushed myself, hoping that if I stacked enough accomplishments, they'd finally see me. But the truth was, no matter how high I climbed, Daniel's shadow stretched further. They had already decided he was the golden child, and once that role was cast, there was no room for another star. The hardest part wasn't even being overlooked. It was realizing that my parents didn't see it as cruelty. To them, it was natural. Daniel was exceptional, and I was just there. It wasn't malice. It was something worse, indifference. And indifference leaves deeper scars than outright hate ever could. It wasn't just one moment. It was years of them, small cuts that built into something deeper than bruises. I think about the school art show when I was 12. I had worked for weeks on a painting, pouring every bit of myself into it. The night of the exhibit, I looked for my parents in the crowd, hoping for their smile, their pride. They showed up late, of course. My mother glanced at my painting, muttered, "That's nice," and then rushed us over to congratulate Daniel on his science project. My ribbon, small as it was, never made it into the stories they told afterward. High school didn't change much. When I made the honor roll, I was proud. I handed my parents the certificate, expecting at least a hug. My father looked at it briefly, nodded, and said, "Good. Daniel just got into honors chemistry. You should ask him for tips." I stood there holding that paper, realizing my achievement wasn't even mine in their eyes. It was just another reason to mention him. Birthdays were the same. I can't remember a single one where I felt celebrated. Once my mother forgot to buy a cake. She laughed it off, saying, "You don't really care about that stuff, do you?" But I did. I cared more than I could ever admit out loud. The year Daniel turned 21, they rented a hall, invited everyone, and toasted him like he was royalty. I sat in the corner that night, clapping with everyone else, wondering if anyone even noticed that my birthdays passed like shadows. Even little things at home carved the wound deeper. Dinner conversations where I tried to tell a story from school, only to be interrupted. Family gatherings where I sat quietly while jokes flew around the table at my expense. Comments like, "Lighten up, Evelyn," when I looked hurt. They never realized that what they called teasing was a reminder that my feelings didn't matter. By the time I was older, I had learned to stop trying. Why waste energy speaking when I knew I'd be brushed aside? Why share my wins when I knew they'd be minimized? Silence became my shield. I smiled when expected, nodded along, and let the spotlight stay where they always wanted it, on Daniel. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a constant ache, the kind that grows heavier the more you carry it. Each dismissal whispered the same message. You don't matter. You're an afterthought. And when you hear that enough times, you start to believe it. Looking back, I don't think they even realized how much damage they were doing. To them, it was just life. To me, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Each ignored achievement, each brushed aside moment, each time I was invisible, it all carved the same wound, one that never seemed to heal. And it was that wound that made my mother's words at Christmas not just cruel, but confirmation of everything I had feared all along. The dining room was glowing with the soft light of the chandelier, the table set with polished silverware, steaming dishes, and the kind of decorations that made it look like a magazine spread. On the surface, it was a picture-perfect Christmas dinner. But beneath the glitter and the candles, something darker lingered. I could feel it before it even happened. I sat at the end of the table, listening to the usual chorus of praise directed at Daniel. Stories of his work, his charm, his life filled the air. I tried to stay small, to keep my head down, as if my quietness could shield me from notice. But silence never kept me safe in that house. It happened so suddenly that I almost thought I had imagined it. My mother's voice cut across the chatter, sharp and deliberate. "Nobody likes you." "Get out." She didn't shout, but the weight of her words slammed into me like a door being slammed in my face. For a split second, the table went quiet. Then, as if on cue, the laughter started. It wasn't just nervous chuckles. It was real laughter. My brother leaned back in his chair, smirking. A cousin covered her mouth, shaking with amusement. Even my father let out something that sounded dangerously close to a laugh before returning to his plate. I sat there frozen, every cell in my body screaming, but my voice trapped in my throat. I wanted to defend myself, to ask how she could humiliate me like that in front of everyone, on Christmas of all nights. But the more I looked around, the more I realized the truth. My pain wasn't an accident. It was entertainment. They didn't just let it happen, they enjoyed it. The laughter echoed in my ears, louder than the clinking of glasses, louder than the carols playing faintly in the background. My chest burned, my hands trembled under the table. I felt myself shatter, piece by piece, as though every dismissal, every forgotten moment, every subtle cruelty had been building to this very scene. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against tile cutting through the laughter for a moment. My eyes stung, but I refused to let them see me cry. My mother smirked, satisfied, as if she had won something. My father kept eating. Daniel leaned toward one of our cousins and whispered something that made them both laugh harder. I stood without a word, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My legs felt heavy, but somehow I managed to walk out of that room. Each step was like dragging a chain, but I knew I had to move. I couldn't sit there another second, couldn't let them drink in my pain like it was part of their holiday feast. In the hallway, the sound of their laughter followed me, spilling out of the dining room like smoke. I grabbed my coat, my hands still shaking, and stepped outside into the cold night. Snowflakes hit my face, sharp and clean, almost like they were reminding me to breathe. Out there in the freezing air, I realized something devastating. Christmas had always been about family, but my family had just shown me I didn't belong. And as much as it broke me, a new thought crept in beneath the hurt. If they didn't want me at their table, maybe I was done begging for a seat. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the sting of what had just happened inside. The sound of their laughter still echoed in my ears, replaying in cruel waves as if my mind wanted to etch it into memory. I didn't yell, I didn't slam the door, I didn't give them one last look. I simply walked out. The snow crunched beneath my shoes, sharp and steady, each step a beat that reminded me I was moving forward, away. My hands were shoved into my coat pockets, fists clenched, but not from anger anymore. It was something heavier than that, resignation, maybe even relief. The night air smelled clean, carrying none of the suffocating judgment that hung thick in the dining room I had just left behind. I thought, for a split second, about turning back, about standing in the doorway and demanding they see me, demanding they hear the years of pain I had swallowed in silence. But what would it have changed? Their laughter wasn't nervous, it wasn't confused, it was genuine, and nothing I could say would make them regret it. They didn't want me there. That truth rang louder than the church bells in the distance. The houses on the street glowed with warm lights, wreaths on doors, trees twinkling in windows. Inside those homes, families gathered, exchanging gifts, laughter, and love. I walked past them like a ghost, wondering if anyone else that night was carrying the same weight in their chest, the same ache of being unwanted. But even if they were, I doubted their mother had told them to get out in front of a room full of people. That cruelty felt uniquely mine. Each breath fogged the air, the cold biting my lungs. I focused on the rhythm of walking, the crunch of the snow, the distant hum of carols playing from a neighbor's house. Simple sounds, small things, but they grounded me. They reminded me I still existed beyond their table, beyond their laughter. I didn't know where I was heading. Home didn't feel like home anymore, not after that. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going back inside. Not tonight, not ever in the same way. Something had broken that couldn't be pieced together with apologies, or worse, silence. I walked until my fingers ached with cold and my legs felt heavy, and still I didn't stop. It wasn't about the destination. It was about reclaiming the only thing left to me, my dignity. I wouldn't beg for a seat in a room that thrived on my pain. I wouldn't argue for love that should have been freely given. The snow kept falling, covering my footprints as though erasing the path behind me. And maybe that was a gift. A clean slate, a reminder that the past didn't have to dictate where I went next. Alone in the dark, I whispered to myself, so quietly the wind almost stole it. I deserve better than this. And for the first time that night, I almost believed it. The apartment was small, barely more than a box with thin walls and a window that rattled when the wind pushed against it, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. No clinking glasses, no mocking laughter, no voices reminding me I was less. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant sounds of the city outside. At first, it felt unbearably lonely. I'd sit at the tiny table with a bowl of instant noodles, staring at the chipped paint on the wall, wondering if I had made a mistake. The apartment wasn't much to look at. The radiator hissed more than it warmed, and the mattress I bought secondhand sagged in the middle. But every time I thought of the Christmas table, of my mother's sneer and the laughter that followed, I reminded myself. This emptiness was still kinder than what I had left behind. Cheap meals became routine. Canned soup, rice, frozen vegetables thrown into a pan. There were nights I counted coins before heading to the corner store, embarrassed but determined. I worked long hours, dragging myself home after shifts that blurred into one another. My feet ached, my back hurt, but I didn't complain. Work was survival, and survival was freedom. The walls were bare at first, but slowly I began to make the space mine. A thrift store lamp with a soft glow, a blanket I crocheted to keep warm. My sketches taped to the wall, each one a reminder that my creativity didn't need their approval to exist. Every small touch made the apartment feel less like an escape and more like a beginning. Some nights the loneliness crept in, whispering that maybe they were right. Maybe nobody liked me. But then I'd curl up under that blanket, close my eyes, and remind myself, they don't define me. I do. The quiet wasn't punishment. It was space to finally hear my own thoughts. I started to notice the small freedoms. No one interrupted when I spoke, even if it was just to myself. No one rolled their eyes when I laughed at a show on my laptop. No one compared me to Daniel when I made a decision. My life was mine, messy and meager, but mine. The snow outside turned to slush, and winter slowly softened into spring. I found myself opening the window, letting the breeze carry in sounds of life. Children playing, neighbors chatting, music drifting from a passing car. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's story. I was writing my own, one cheap meal, one long day, one quiet night at a time. The apartment wasn't glamorous, but it was a refuge. It was proof that I could survive without them, that I could breathe without choking on their judgment. Lonely as it was, it felt freer than the suffocating cruelty I had left behind. And that freedom, fragile as it was, became the foundation for something I had never truly known before: hope. Work became more than survival. It became purpose. I threw myself into every project, every deadline, every chance to prove to myself that I was capable. My coworkers began to notice, not just my effort, but my creativity, the way I could find solutions others overlooked. Slowly, recognition trickled in. A good job from my manager, then bigger responsibilities, then a promotion that I never thought possible back when I sat invisible at my family's table. But it wasn't just about work. I realized I couldn't build a life if all I did was pour myself into hours and exhaustion. I needed something of my own. So, I started picking up side projects, designs, crafts, small freelance jobs that let me explore skills I had always loved but never been taken seriously for. Each time someone paid me for my work, each time I saw my creations appreciated by strangers, it felt like reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to erase. Friendships came slowly, but they came. At first I kept people at arm's length, afraid of opening up, afraid of being laughed at again. But one by one, small gestures broke through. A coworker who invited me out for coffee, a neighbor who knocked on my door with leftover food, a classmate from a workshop who messaged me about collaborating. These people didn't see me as less. They saw me as someone worth their time. I started to laugh again, real laughter, the kind that didn't come with the sting of being mocked right after. I shared meals, stories, and inside jokes that belonged to me and my chosen circle. The loneliness that had haunted me in the early days of the apartment softened, replaced by warmth I had never thought I'd find outside of family. It turned out that sometimes family wasn't about blood. It was about who showed up, who cared, who made space for you without asking you to shrink first. The transformation wasn't loud, but it was steady. I ate better, cared for my body, invested in my health. I picked up hobbies I had once abandoned because no one in my house thought they were worthwhile. Reading, sketching, even cooking real meals, things that made me feel alive rather than tolerated. Every day, I felt myself stepping further away from the girl who sat silently at that Christmas table, trying not to cry as laughter echoed around her. Every achievement, every kind word from someone new, every smile that came without cruelty chipped away at the hold my family once had over me. They had never cared to see me, but that no longer mattered. I was learning to see myself, to build a life brick by brick, choice by choice. A life where my worth wasn't measured against Daniel's charm or my mother's cold approval. A life where I was more than enough. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And it was all because I finally stopped waiting for them to notice. The irony was almost laughable. While my family sat around their polished table, assuming I'd never amount to anything, I was quietly stacking bricks into something solid. At work, the recognition that had begun as small nods grew into trust. My boss started assigning me to bigger projects, the kind that had real weight, real visibility. I stayed late, not because I was desperate to prove myself to them, but because I was proving something to me. When the promotion came, it felt like the first real affirmation that I was building a career, not just scraping by. With the raise came breathing room, and with breathing room came choices. I had always been cautious with money, out of necessity. Now, with a little extra, I started learning, reading about investing, saving, growing what I had. I opened an account, put small amounts in, and watched it build. Bit by bit, I was creating something my family never thought I could have: stability. The success wasn't just financial. Within my field, my name started circulating. A colleague introduced me at a conference saying, "She's one of the sharpest people I've worked with." Hearing that felt surreal, like he was talking about someone else. But it was me. My ideas were being quoted in meetings. My emails got replies that used to go unanswered. I wasn't just present anymore, I was respected. It was almost funny how none of them knew. At family gatherings, on the rare occasions I attended, I'd hear Daniel talk about his latest promotion, see my parents beam, and watch as they turned to me with polite small talk, as though my life was still small. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them about the raise, the investments, the reputation I was quietly carving out. I let them think I was invisible, because I was no longer living for their applause. The security I was building wasn't just about money or reputation, it was about control. For the first time, I felt like my future was mine. I didn't need to beg them for anything. I didn't need to fear being left out or left behind. If tomorrow they cut me off completely, I would still stand. Some nights, I'd sit at my small apartment table, still the same chipped one I had in the beginning, and look at the stack of papers, the savings reports, the notes from clients and colleagues. I thought about that Christmas dinner, about the way my mother's voice had sliced through me when she said, "Nobody likes you." And I realized now how wrong she had been. People did like me. People valued me. People believed in me, just not the ones who shared my blood. The hidden success wasn't just numbers or titles. It was the quiet knowledge that I had created the life they never believed I could. And the best part was knowing I didn't need to flaunt it to make it real. It was mine, whether they saw it or not. It started quietly, in whispers that floated through extended family and neighbors. Daniel, the golden child who could do no wrong, was suddenly the subject of murmurs instead of praise. I overheard an aunt mention that his new house wasn't fully paid for, that bills had been piling up behind the glossy facade. Another relative let slip that his relationship with the woman everyone admired wasn't the fairy tale it had seemed. The cracks were small at first, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. For years, Daniel had been the shining example my parents loved to display. His promotions, his charm, his supposed financial stability, it was the banner they waved while my achievements went unnoticed. But now, people were saying the promotions had plateaued, that his charm at work had worn thin, and that his financial decisions weren't as sound as he boasted. Behind the confident smile, it sounded like he was struggling to keep his footing. I didn't take joy in his pain, but I couldn't help the sense of irony. This was the brother they had placed on a pedestal so high that the rest of us couldn't breathe in his shadow. And yet, pedestals wobble. They crumble when the truth presses against them long enough. At another holiday gathering I reluctantly attended, I noticed things myself. Daniel looked tired, his laughter forced. His partner barely made eye contact with him, and when my mother praised him loudly for a new investment, I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. It was the same dinner table where my own worth had been mocked, but this time the energy was different. The audience who once worshipped every detail of his life seemed unsure, as though they weren't buying the performance anymore. The perfection my parents clung to was unraveling. The family image, matching sweaters, curated photos, polished small talk, was still there on the surface, but underneath, reality seeped through. I thought back to all the times I was dismissed because I didn't fit their script. All the times they told me I wasn't enough, while praising someone who now was barely holding his own life together. I didn't speak a word about what I knew. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The cracks spoke for themselves. The same people who had laughed when my mother told me, "Nobody likes you," were now glancing sideways, questioning the truth of the perfect picture they had always applauded. What struck me most was how fragile their illusion had always been. I had believed for years that I was the problem, that if I could just be more like Daniel, more polished, more perfect, maybe I would be accepted. But watching the facade fall apart taught me something. Perfection is an act that eventually collapses under its own weight. For the first time, I didn't feel small in comparison. I felt steady, grounded, even proud. Their illusion was breaking, but my reality, quiet, steady, self-built, was stronger than it had ever been. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was finishing up work. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months, my parents' home. For a moment, I froze, staring at it. They hadn't called me since that Christmas dinner, since the night my mother spat those words and everyone laughed. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear what excuse they'd spin this time. I answered. My mother's voice came through, unusually sweet. "Evelyn, darling, how are you? We've missed you." The words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script. I almost laughed. Missed me? This was the same woman who told me, "Nobody likes you." The same family that sat by in silence while my humiliation became entertainment. Now suddenly, I was missed. Before I could respond, she continued, her tone soft but rushed. She asked about my job, about my apartment, about how I was getting by, questions she'd never cared to ask before. Then came the pause, the one that revealed the truth behind the warmth. "Your father and I, well, things have been difficult lately. Daniel, too. We've had some unexpected expenses, and we thought maybe you could help. You've always been so resourceful." There it was, not love, not regret, desperation, dressed up as affection. They didn't call because they wanted me back in their lives. They called because they needed something from me. Money, maybe even connections I'd worked hard to earn. The silence on my end stretched, and I could feel her discomfort growing. Then my father's voice cut in, firm but shaky. "We're family, Evelyn. Family helps each other. Whatever bitterness you've been holding on to, it's time to put that behind us." Bitterness. That's what they called years of being dismissed, the Christmas humiliation, the hospital of empty support, bitterness as if I hadn't earned every scar they gave me. I let them speak, let them spin their story of sudden warmth and family unity. But inside, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and clarity. They only remembered I existed when their perfect golden sun couldn't deliver, when their own choices began to crumble. I had become their backup plan, the daughter they ignored until she was useful. When my mother tried again, her voice pleading this time, "Please, Evelyn, you know we love you," I almost laughed out loud. Love? Love had never left me alone in a hospital bed. Love had never told me to get out of a Christmas dinner. Love had never erased my existence in favor of Daniel's spotlight. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told them I'd think about it and hung up. But the decision was already made. For the first time, I wasn't the little girl desperate for their approval. I wasn't the shadow at the dinner table. I was someone they needed, and I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. When the call came again, I answered. This time I wasn't caught off guard. I knew what they wanted, and I knew exactly what I needed to say. My mother's voice started in with the same syrupy tone as before, soft and deliberate, as if she could trick me into forgetting everything. "Evelyn, dear, we've been thinking about you." About how much you mean to us, I didn't let her finish. "Do you remember Christmas?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. On the other end, silence. "Do you remember when you told me, in front of everyone, 'Nobody likes you, get out?' Because I do. I remember it every single day. And I remember how you all laughed while I sat there, humiliated." My father cleared his throat. "That was, well, you're blowing it out of proportion." Families fight. Evelyn? I almost smiled at how predictable that was. Fight? A fight is raised voices, maybe some harsh words. But what you did wasn't a fight. It was cruelty. It was a declaration that I wasn't wanted. And you know what? I listened. I left. And since then, I've built a life without you. I could hear my mother trying to cut in, but I kept going, refusing to let them drown me out the way they always had. I built a career. I made investments. I surrounded myself with people who actually show up when it matters. people who ask how I'm doing without needing something in return. And not once did I need you to make it happen. My father's tone shifted from dismissive to sharp. Evelyn, we're your parents. We raised you. You owe us. That was the moment I realized just how blind they really were. I don't owe you anything, I said, my words cutting through the silence. You raised me to feel small, invisible, unworthy. You cheered for Daniel while you tore me down. And when I needed you most, you were nowhere. The truth is, I don't need you now. I never did. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter I'd endured at their table. I imagined them sitting there, stunned, trying to figure out how the quiet daughter they'd once dismissed had grown this voice, this strength. Finally, my mother whispered, Evelyn, please. But there was no conviction in it, just desperation. I'm not your savior, I told them. Not now, not ever. You chose your favorite. You chose to humiliate me. You chose silence when I walked away. And now I choose myself. I choose the life I've built, the one you'll never take credit for. I ended the call. No shouting, no tears, just the sound of my own steady breath filling the room. For the first time, I wasn't Evelyn, the overlooked daughter, or Evelyn, the punchline. I was Evelyn who walked away, who thrived without them, who stood in her truth. And they could never take that from me. Christmas morning used to mean waking up in that old house, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven, and the sharp sting of knowing the day would end with me being reminded of my place at the bottom of the family ladder. But this year was different. I woke in my small apartment, sunlight streaming in across the new curtains I'd bought myself, the quiet hum of the city outside. There was no heavy silence, no pit in my stomach about what cruel remark might be waiting for me at the dinner table. Instead, there was warmth, not from tradition, not from blood, but from something I had chosen for myself. By noon, my living room was alive with laughter. My friends, my chosen family, piled in with food, gifts, and stories. Sarah brought her famous sweet potato casserole, joking that it was basically dessert disguised as dinner. Marcus showed up with 2 bottles of champagne, grinning ear to ear as he declared it was time to toast to freedom. Even my coworker James, who I'd only known a year, came carrying flowers and a soft smile that told me he understood more than he said. As the table filled with food, I thought back to those Christmas dinners where Daniel's stories consumed the air and my words died in my throat. Here, every voice mattered. Here, every laugh was genuine, not cruel. When I shared a story about my promotion, no one brushed it aside. They clapped, they cheered, they raised their glasses. For the first time in my life, celebration didn't mean comparison. It meant joy, pure and simple. Later, as the evening settled, Sarah nudged me and asked softly, "Do you miss them today?" For a moment, I let the question sit. Did I miss the house with the glowing lights? The tree with presents stacked beneath it? Or the people who made sure I never felt enough? I shook my head. I don't miss them. I miss the idea of what family should have been. But I've built something better here. She squeezed my hand, and I realized I meant every word. When midnight came, we exchanged small gifts. Nothing extravagant, just tokens of thoughtfulness. A scarf in my favorite color. A framed photo of the group of us at a summer picnic. A journal with my initials on the cover. Each one whispered the same truth. I was seen. I was valued. As I stood looking around at the faces glowing in the soft light of my apartment, a final reflection settled in my chest like peace itself. They once told me nobody liked me. They laughed as if my worth was a joke. But tonight, surrounded by people who chose me, I saw it clearly. I am loved, I am respected, I am free. And that, I realized, is the only gift I ever needed.